We're getting started on hearing number on bill number 19-0408, ordinance transparency and claim litigation. For those of you in the back who do not have a seat, we do have overflow seating upstairs. I'd like to acknowledge some my council colleagues. To my left is the vice chair of the committee, Councilman Burnett. Councilman Pinkett from the 7th District. Councilwoman McCray from the 2nd District, Councilman Cohn from the 1st. And agency folks, we have Michelle Wurzburg from the Police Department, Ellen DePietro from the Law Department, and we have Nicholas Bundy from the Mayor's Office, and Bob Senemy from Finance. And before we get started, I'd like to turn the floor over to the bill sponsor. She just disappeared. Okay, well, wait. Do any of the agencies want to speak on the report, or do they all stand by their report?
Good evening, Mr. Chair. We stand by our report. We had some detailed comments, and we'd be happy to go through those if it would be helpful for the committee and answer any questions if you'd like me to.
Okay.
Hi, good evening. Bob Senemy, Budget Director, representing the Department of Finance. So I know this is obviously a very sensitive issue, and what I wanted to do is just try to provide a bit of context from a financial perspective about what this could look like if implemented. So, and we really focus in our report on two pieces of this. One, the implementation cost, and two, what this would do for the city's claims cost over time. So first, on the implementation, there is a requirement in this bill for reporting, public reporting, to take a summary of cases and make them available to the public. So there is not currently in the law department one unified system of record to gather all that information and make it available to the public. So we estimate that there would be a cost of about $200,000 or 2 FTEs to be assigned to be able to consolidate this information. Alternatively, probably a better approach would be if we could invest in some kind of technology to gather this information and make sure that it can be gathered and visible and available. And so we have encouraged the law department, and we will work with the law department to get to invest in that technology and to try to overcome that particular barrier. On the claims payment side, and again from a financial standpoint, first, police misconduct cases are very costly for the city. In our bill report, we have laid out the history of the data over the last 5 years. We've spent about $25 million over the past 5 years in these payouts, so that it's an average of nearly $5 million per year. Despite those costs, though, the city's approach has actually likely saved us money over time. And the reason for that is because our approach, the city's approach and the law department's approach, is that we tried to settle cases rather than to drag out litigation. And it's usually actually in the interest of both parties to come to a settlement. It avoids, long drawn-out litigation where people's reputations get harmed, where there's costly attorney's fees and legal fees. And in our opinion, by limiting the tools that are available to the law department, which is what this bill does, we're concerned that it could push more cases away from a settlement, which is in the city's financial interest. And it could push more cases into a pattern where folks want to litigate the case. And the warning I would just say to the committee tonight is that litigation is very it's very hard to predict. It's very unreliable. We had a case just last year where a jury awarded a claimant $15 million. The city appealed that case, but in one fell swoop, you can wipe out years or months worth of budget if you lose one case in litigation. So from our perspective, because of the uncertainty of what this legislation does, by infringing on the law department's ability to settle cases in what they feel is the best and most appropriate way, we feel like it opens up what we feel is not an unacceptable level of risk on the financial side. And so based on that, we're opposed to this legislation. I'm happy to take questions from anybody on the committee about any of those points.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Law Department.
Good evening, Elena DePietro, Baltimore City Law Department. I don't really have anything to add to my report, but I'm happy to take questions. I think the council's well aware of the supremacy of the charter and why it is that way, and so I really have nothing beyond that to say about the bill.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions?
Okay.
Police Department.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. My name is Michelle Wurzberger. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the Baltimore Police Department. We stand by our report.
Thank you. Mayor's office. Okay. All right, so first off, I want to thank the bill sponsor, Councilwoman Sneed, for bringing this important bill to the council. The practice of these gag orders has caused a tremendous amount of harm to the city. All of us as citizens and residents of Baltimore City deserve to know what our government is doing, where our money is going, and this practice has prevented us from having that ability and having the transparency and accountability that we all deserve. And so I want to thank Councilwoman Sneed and Council President Scott for working really hard on this bill, and I'd like to turn the floor over to Councilwoman Sneed.
Thank you. So the Transparency and Oversight in Claims and Litigation Bill was introduced on July 22nd, following the Court of Appeals ruling that finds that use of non-disclosure agreements to be unconstitutional, period. This bill has been in the works since last fall and would prohibit the use of non-disclosure agreements in settlement cases for police misconduct and unlawful claims against Baltimore City. Victims of police brutality, sexual assault, and unlawful discrimination should have the right to speak overtly about their experiences and tell their own stories. This allows citizens to heal from past trauma. The issue disproportionately affects women and people of color from speaking about sexual harassment and police misconduct. I still recall the story from a pregnant woman who lives in my district and is not able to speak about her incident involving police brutality, but was watched by neighbors on the street in Baltimore City. All taxpayers deserve the right to know how and why and their tax dollars are being spent. We have to get serious about rebuilding trust between citizens of Baltimore, the police department, city agencies, and elected officials. The language under the current executive order does not codify the accountability and transparency this bill guarantees. I'm asking that you guys, the audience here, when you speak out, speak your truths tonight. Thank you.
So we're going to get into public testimony. We're going to be giving everybody a standard 2 minutes to give your testimony. When your name is called, I'll call the next few people up at a time so that you'll know if you're next. I'd like to also welcome Senator Jill Carter. Saw her in the back, and I'd like to call her up to give her testimony.
That's for dramatic effect. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you, Councilwoman Sneed, for bringing this bill. This issue of gag orders is somewhat personal for me because of my experience when I was director of the Office of Civil Rights and Wage Enforcement. We actually had issues with the law department, the city solicitor, where we were prohibited. There were attempts to silence our Civilian Review Board in doing its job for police oversight, and some of you may remember that the Civilian Review Board actually had to sue because the law department ordered the Baltimore Police Department not to comply with the law and send the Civilian Review Board police files. So again, thank you for giving me this opportunity to address you. I come to you as a former public defender, a legislator, and former director of the Office of Civil Rights. Also, this past session in Annapolis, I sponsored Senate Bill 979, which would have done exactly this on a state level. Well, at least the prohibition of the gag orders. It wouldn't have on police abuse. It would not necessarily have covered the discrimination aspect, which I fully support. I think that Baltimore should send a message that this is no place for discrimination and that people that are aggrieved have a right to have their voices heard. A part of the healing process is that people should be able to talk about their pain. And so it's not enough just to give compensation, but it also have to give people a chance to be heard. It's also critically important to the people of Baltimore to understand where the millions of their tax dollars have been going in the settlement of all of these cases over a good many number of years. In addition to the fact that it's in the best interest of the people and this body that represents the people, it's also in the best interest of the police department, because the police lose when there's mistrust due to lack of transparency, as we know that we suffer because of our current plight of even being under consent decree. The facts are needed of these cases to dispel actually the worst of rumors and the worst abuses. If the people have no confidence that the police will deal fairly with complaints, they're less inclined to cooperate with police, less likely to report misconduct, and the cycle continues. We know from all of our prior experience that we have not been able to depend on the Internal Affairs Division, and we know that the Civilian Review Board is largely prohibited from being able to enact discipline for police abuse. And so all that our citizens have is the ability to bring lawsuit, and there should be no penalty for bringing lawsuit that you somehow lose the ability to talk about how you've been aggrieved. People of Baltimore have a right to know what's happening to their neighbors, and only through this kind of transparency can that happen. Now, with regard to the executive order for today, I applaud the mayor on his effort, but it's simply not enough. As we know, executive orders can be brought and don't have to be followed. They can be retracted. We need a law, we need the bill, and we need a law to be passed. Not to mention, this should be the policy of Baltimore City regardless of who is in the office of mayor. And I would also say that the executive order, gives discretion to the law department. And I want to speak about that a little bit because the Fourth Circuit has ruled, as Councilwoman Snead mentioned, that these gag orders are unconstitutional violations of the First Amendment. We can't allow the practice of a contract or a law department or a city solicitor to have the type of discretion in these incidents that actually violate the First Amendment of the Constitution. And so I don't even see where that's a relevant issue because it's been deemed unconstitutional. It hasn't been overturned. There was an attempt to get the court to revise its decision. That attempt failed. Case closed. And finally, I'll just say, we are told that there is no need for this level of transparency and no need to ban the coerced silence that this brings, but that the victims are free to speak, but we know better. Ask Ashley Overby and countless other victims and families of these kinds of abuses. We won't settle for the silence, the secrecy, or for the suppression. We won't settle for this any longer. You're doing the right thing. Please move this bill forward with all deliberate speed. What's done in the dark must be brought to the light. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. Just so we're clear, I just want to make sure that people understand where you stand. Should Baltimore City be requiring people who settle with the city to sign NDAs/gag orders, period?
Absolutely not.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next three up are going to be Ashley Overboy, Tawanda Jones, and Mark Reuter. And so if Ms. Overboy can come up first. Yeah, Overby, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. All right. My name is Ashley Overby Underwood, and I am a survivor of police brutality at the hands of Baltimore City police officers. I was victimized not once, but twice, first by the officers and then by the city of Baltimore. 7 years ago, April 2012, I was beaten, tased, falsely arrested, imprisoned, and charged by 3 officers of the Baltimore City Police Department after I called them for help because my home had been burglarized. The demeanor of the first of the 3 officers to arrive was very hostile and threatening from initial contact, which began with him barging into my apartment unannounced and without identifying himself, where only women and children were present. After asking him several times to identify himself and why he was there, he stepped in my face with his hand on his weapon, stating that he was called. I informed him that we did not call him, and he still needed to identify himself. He then told me I was under arrest. He placed my hands behind my back and walked me toward the door. I turned my head and asked what I was being arrested for, and he snapped. The beating began, and it went on for what seemed like forever. Eventually, I was placed in cuffs, but never once had I resisted arrest like they accused me of. That night, I sat in jail, crying, distraught, in a cold, dirty jail cell next to my mother, beaten and bruised, trying to figure out exactly what I was going to do. I had to get to my daughter, first of all, to make sure she was okay, and to figure out what we would do next because I knew I was going to lose my home. I was trapped there after my life had completely fallen apart in just a few hours. While these officers went home to their families and on with their lives, I was left to pick up the pieces of mine, totally uncertain of what to do or even where to begin. Homeless, 7 charges on my name, and no money to take care of us, I spent a little over 2 years jobless with dirt on my name. If I wanted to pursue a civil case against these officers for beating me, I could not expunge my record until the civil case was over, making finding work impossible. I couldn't find a home or provide a home for my children, forcing me to send them to temporarily live with their fathers during the week while I only got them on the weekends. That alone made me feel like a horrible mother. That reason in itself was the reason that I almost gave up several times on seeking justice in this case. Every time I tried to contact my lawyer and drop it and say just throw it away, I couldn't do it. I cried many nights, so many that I lost count, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this happened to me and it didn't happen to me just for no reason. August 2014, a settlement offer was put on the table. The lawyer told me that the city could drag the case out for another few years, a few years which I didn't have because I had to survive now. More importantly, I had to provide for my children. When he explained the non-disclosure agreement, he said that neither the city or myself could speak to news media regarding the case, only that a settlement had been reached, which it also read on paper. Reluctantly, I did agree, and I signed, feeling like I had no choice but to take it in order to get any type of justice from this. A few weeks passed before I heard anything. Out of nowhere, I start getting texts and calls congratulating me on my money. I'm getting jokes talking about when do we get paid. I immediately got afraid because the initial reason this all started was because my home was burglarized. I rushed to the Baltimore Sun's website, and sure enough, I found my mugshot, my full name, and an amount of $63,000 in settlement money that I had supposedly won. I had not received a dime. I hadn't even heard from anyone in regards to my settlement check. My heart sank immediately. I reached out to my lawyers, no contact from them. I then was led to an article on a blog site in which I found the city solicitor lying about me being the one to provoke the officers in this case. He stated that I provoked the officers by being aggressive and that I even hit one of the officers first, then followed with the most horrific comments from fellow citizens. I did respond to some of these comments in an attempt to defend myself. I was upset, but I was most upset not about the lies in the article, but that the fact that I was lied to in regards to how the non-disclosure agreement really worked. It only prohibited me from speaking and not the city. So while the officers remained unnamed and protected, my name once again was dragged through the mud. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Wanda Jones.
Mic check!
First of all, I want to thank you all so much for actually allowing us to do this tonight. This is a moment that I've been waiting for like forever. Basically, I'm the sister of Tyrone West. My big brother, my king, my everything, was brutally murdered, executed in the most vicious, horrific way by people that's supposed to serve and protect. And for 6 tirelessly long years, my family as well as supporters have been working and speaking out about it. And it got to the point that I was placed into a predicament that I didn't expect to be placed into, and that was removing my name as personal representative for my brother's estate, representing his children, thus for. It was when we decided to, but basically what had happened after my brother was brutally murdered and me going through 5 long years of hearing about how vicious and brutally my brother was murdered, I didn't want to take my family through it because it almost killed me. I had to pick myself up, go to work, smile, and act like none of that stuff that I heard existed, blocked it all out. Because to me, there's never closure when your loved one is murdered. I don't care what nobody says. There's only accountability, and that's what we're seeking. So when we went to the point, and I was waiting, I wanted to go to court so bad because all I wanted was truth so we can get to a criminal aspect of the case. That's why we seek attorneys in the first place, not for civil, but for criminal charges. And then when you have a prosecutor that doesn't want to prosecute, that laughs in your family face, the same way he laughed in my face, he laughed in Anthony Anderson's family face and many other victims. That's why immediately when my brother was murdered, we started West Swansea, where we speak visually, and we opened this space up for not just my brother, because it didn't start at my brother. Unfortunately, it doesn't end with my brother. Long story short, cutting right through the chase. When we decided to go through the settlement piece because they wanted to wait like 72 hours before the trial was going to actually start, and then I seen my family members crying, and I remembered all that horrible stuff I heard, so I was like, it's just too much for them. Fine, we'll settle out, even though that's not what I wanted to do. That's not what I wanted to do. But anyway, long story short, as we get right to the very last minute and everything is done, and I'm still feeling some type of way because, for one, you cannot put a price on a life. It's not about the income, it's about the outcome, and that's what these people and everybody fails to realize. So when we get in there, through all that painful stuff, and I'm sitting there feeling some type of way, and as I'm getting ready to end things up, I'm ready to go, they're like, hold up, we need you to sign this, the NBA. That's when that came in, talking about how they was going to craft my language. And at that moment, I'm like, the devil is a liar. Take me completely off. You're not going to craft anything. Nobody crafted the way my brother was tortured by repeat violent offenders that had, if they wouldn't have, what if I would not, if I would have took the money and just shut up? These are repeat violent offenders that's working for Baltimore Finest, as you call it, that are still serving and working with promotions for murdering my brother. And to name a few victims, and I only got 2 minutes, but 24 hours, Darrell Harris, Joseph Green, James Green, and Abdul Salam. Those are the only victims that I know about that are not under a gag that they could talk about it. What if they were under a gag, like the other victims that Ruiz, Chapman, and all of them brutalized? These are repeat violent offenders. So to me, if you keep on gagging us, you are condoning violence on every level. Every level. No family should have to go through this. So many families reach out to me, and it's not right. And they reach out to me because I can be trusted. I'm not going to throw them under the bus and say their name because they know that I'm not about no money. I don't work for a dollar bill. I work for my people, and that's it. You cannot pay me to sell any of my brothers or sisters out, because at the end of the day, the same way I'm fighting for them, I'm fighting for everybody in here. It can easily happen to y'all, and if we don't get it right, it's going to continuously happen. So even though I applaud the mayor's effort for this executive order, I'm I'm upset. I'm just going to be clear on it because it did not have the language crafted that we need to speak. Number one, that is unconstitutional. That should have been first on the top line. So we're going to write something to do something. Let's get it right. And that's why I'm continuously wanting to work with them so we can get it right, because people are dying and that's not right. And that's how I'm going to end on that note. So I ask y'all all to make it right. You have the power. We can do it. I can't, but we can. Thank you.
Mark Reuter.
Good evening. My name is Mark Reuter. I'm a reporter and editor at the Baltimore Brew. The Baltimore Brew is a co-plaintiff in this lawsuit by the ACLU and a co-plaintiff with Ms. Underwood. We joined this lawsuit because of the impediments that have been placed on the Brew and on other news organizations in gathering information about police settlements. The Brew is going on 10 years now of covering local government. One of our main interests is in the Board of Estimates and the spending of city money. So we have covered scores of these police settlement cases, and we have run into roadblocks, which we think are a violation, and the 4th District Appeals Court seems to agree, or does agree, of our news gathering. Let me explain how some of the original settlements were arranged by the city a few years ago. There's been some changes since. The settlements over $50,000, all settlements under $50,000 were never publicly disclosed. The settlements over $50,000 were disclosed for many years simply by naming the defendants and the plaintiff, mayor and city council of Baltimore, and sometimes the officers involved. Under a certain amount of pressure, we were able to get summaries of these cases written by the law department that summarized those. Those cases and those summaries were not available to the general public. Eventually, there's been changes, so there now is around a 1-paragraph summary written by city lawyers about the case, often very, very general. Our attempts then to try to reach the plaintiffs in these cases have been discouraged and stopped because of the threat that any plaintiff who talks would lose some or all of their money. So we join this complaint as a First Amendment case, and we believe that the City Council bill is in the public interest. Having the website that you've proposed that would be available to the entire public would be a very important reform. And it would put all of this stuff transparently for the public and for the media to look at and to report on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next three up are David Roca, Hillary Hellerbach, and Gretchen Tome, I believe it is. David?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is David Roca. I'm the senior staff attorney with the ACLU of Maryland, here in strong support of Council Bill 190409, which would finally end the unconscionable practice of limiting what victims of police misconduct and unlawful discrimination can say about their experiences and harm as a condition of settling their case against the city. It also provides needed transparency regarding the number, kind, and amount of those settlements. Since there appears to be near universal agreement, with the potential exception of the city solicitor, and recognition of how harmful the coerced silence is to victims and the public interest, I'm going to focus my remarks today on why the legislation is still necessary in light of the executive order that was issued today, because that executive order perfectly illustrates the legislation's continued importance and necessity. The executive order is very carefully written to not bar all gag orders or non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, as the city calls them. Instead, it bars only unreasonable NDAs and leaves to the sole discretion of the city solicitor the authority to determine which restrictions on speech he thinks are reasonable and thus barred. But this is the same city solicitor who has been defending tooth and nail the city's practice of completely silencing victims of police misconduct as perfectly reasonable for years. And it is the city solicitor who continues to this day, by his own admission, to impose NDAs, and any assertion to the contrary is simply untrue. We know this from the city solicitor's office itself, from the email which we provided to you in July of this year, attached to our letter, which lays out their current NDA policy, which limits, and it's their word calling it a non-disparagement agreement, an NDA, not mine, And that policy limits a settling plaintiff's comments only to the words that are in the legal papers. But that is still a limit. If it wasn't a limit and wasn't intended to be a limit, there would be absolutely no point in putting it in a settlement agreement in the first place. And court papers often contain only bare bones allegations because that's all that is legally required. And as the executive order itself recognizes, people need to be free to speak their truth to power. That is precisely what the Fourth Circuit held in declaring the city's gag order policy to violate the First Amendment. The government simply has no legitimate interest in limiting what people say about the government or about government officials. In short, the new language is still a limit, still improper, and still illegal. And the city solicitor admitted today in his comments to the Daily Record that the executive order was carefully drafted to allow that practice to continue. I'm quoting now. Davis said the city will continue using language it began to include after he came on the job in September 2017 that limits comments to the facts alleged in pleadings and motions filed with the court. The language we're using now is perfectly compatible with and consistent with the executive order. So if anyone had any doubt about whether this executive order was carefully drafted not to actually end NDAs, but to explicitly allow them to continue, it's there in black and white. The executive order also does nothing for all the past victims who have been coerced into signing them. They need to be individually notified that their agreements are no longer enforceable or will be enforced and that they are free to speak. The executive order does not, like the legislation, apply to claims of unlawful discrimination, and the executive order does not have any transparency provisions about settlements like the legislation. I want to end with the city solicitor's claim that the council does not have the power to act in this area. That assertion is without any legal merit. There is no doubt, as the city solicitor says, that he is the city's lawyer, but he seems to forget who his client is. His client is the mayor and city council, the elected representatives of the people of Baltimore, and it is the client who gets to decide and who has the power under ethics rules that apply to every lawyer, including the city solicitor, what the client's position will be. And that is precisely what the city council is doing here. The provisions in the city charter, the provisions in the city charter regarding the Board of Estimates similarly have absolutely no bearing here. The Board of Estimates sets the fiscal policy of the city and approves the amount of settlements. This bill relates neither to fiscal policy, it relates to non-monetary terms, and the gag orders have no arguable fiscal impact. In fact, the city solicitor has argued that not having gag orders will actually save the city money because they will settle for less. Finally, there is something truly bizarre about telling Baltimore City Council that it does not have the power to set city policy regarding this important policy issue when the executive order itself recognizes the importance of the policy issue and proceeds to purport to set city policy on it. In the end, ending the limits on plaintiff speech is easy to do, and this legislation does it. Because the city solicitor has made it crystal clear that he does not intend to stop imposing limits on plaintiff speech, the council can and must act. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Councilman Cohn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, wanted to just say to Ms. Overby and Ms. Jones, wanted to apologize on behalf of the city to you for what happened to you and your families. I think that when the government inflicts trauma and harm, we should own it and apologize for it. And so for what happened to you, I am truly sorry, and I know my colleagues share that sentiment as well. Mr. Roca, we've seen the continued use of the NDAs has continued to silence folks. In your professional opinion as spokesperson for the ACLU, is there ever an appropriate case for an NDA within the context of city government?
No.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hillary Hellerbach.
Hello. My name is Hillary Hellerbach, and I live in Northeast Baltimore City. I've lived here for over 25 years, and my husband and I have raised our 3 children here. I'm also a social worker who has worked in the criminal justice system, community mental health, and in schools. I am here to encourage you to support this bill fully and to explain some of the reasons I feel that it can be a critical part of supporting the health and well-being of our city's residents. As we know, there are many kinds of trauma experienced by Baltimore's citizens. When a person or system that is tasked with protecting, overseeing, or caring for someone victimizes them, this abuse of power is particularly troubling. We as parents and caregivers tell our children not to keep secrets when bad things happen to them. We have learned that encouraging children and adults to talk about and process adverse events can help them build resilience and to heal. When we deny people the opportunity to talk about trauma, we see increased incidents of physical and mental illness and difficulty functioning in school and in our communities. Victims of police brutality, sexual assault, and discrimination are made vulnerable by the actions of those who abuse the power they have over them. When our city puts gag orders on these citizens, they are further victimized. So, my question to you all and to our mayor and city solicitor is this: will you be like the parent who tells their child to keep the family secret about the relative who abused them because the truth reflects badly on the family? Or will you be like the parent who supports their child in speaking out about the abusive actions so that it can stop and they can feel safe and they can begin to heal? As elected officials, you are all tasked with representing and advocating for your constituents. It is important that we all have the opportunity to be heard, to talk about traumatic things that happen to us. As a member of the West Coalition, I hold up the example of the sister of Tyrone West, who was murdered by police over 6 years ago. Tawanda Jones has used her love for her brother and her voice as she tells the story of what happened to him to heal not only herself, but to provide support and healing to many other victims of police brutality and their families. Her resilience and her voice deserve all of our respect. This city, as we all know, has a history of institutionalized racism and of hiding injustices acted out by police and government officials. It is beyond time for transparency, and it is beyond time for this to stop. This bill can help that happen. We need much more than a resolution or an executive order. We need this full bill to pass. Thank you.
Thank you. Gretchen Tome.
What'd you say?
Just coming.
Good evening. My name is Gretchen Tome. I'm a resident of Baltimore City in the 13th District, and I'm also a member of the coalition that has been fighting for this legislation. And I'm a clinical social worker. I work with survivors of domestic violence, people experiencing homelessness. I hear stories of pain and trauma every day. So I'm here today to speak to the power of telling your story in the process of healing from trauma. I have regularly attended West Wednesday over the past 3 years, and I've heard many stories of police brutality. For the people who come forward to speak, you can see the impact of sharing their story. It's a release. It's a chance to be heard, to be supported and believed. Hundreds of our fellow citizens have been denied this opportunity. Hundreds of our neighbors have had to suffer in forced silence. This council recently heard testimony for the Trauma Responsive Care Act about ways that our city agencies can contribute to healing our city by learning about trauma-informed ways to interact with the community. If you support that legislation, you should also support ending gag orders. Being able to publicly tell your story, to organize with others to push for change, to be able to stand here today and testify are all things that can be powerfully healing to those who have survived the trauma of police brutality, sexual assault, and other discrimination. We can be a city that leads the way in healing trauma, in being transparent, and in holding those who serve us accountable. You have the power to make that decision today and to make sure that our city never silences a citizen again. That is why I urge you to support this legislation, not the executive order. This bill before you today is the one that will do that. Thank you.
Thank you. The next 3 people up are Brittany Oliver, Victoria Williams, and Trey Murphy. So if Brittany Oliver can please come up.
All right. Good evening. As a civil and women's rights advocate and founding director of Not Without Black Women based in Baltimore, who has been fighting for gender discrimination for years, I'd like to thank Baltimore City Council for giving us the opportunity to speak on this issue. Passage of this bill is critical for Baltimore City to send a strong message to the community, especially survivors, that gender violence is real and perpetrators will be held accountable. In 2016, the Department of Justice released a report detailing a widespread racial bias in the patterns or practices of the Baltimore Police Department. But there's just one strain of allegations: gender-based bias and mistreatment. The Justice Department documented numerous instances in its report of hostility toward alleged sexual assault victims, callous treatment of female suspects, public strip searches, and even allegations of sex in exchange for immunity. This is why the ending of the uses of gag orders are important. My job as an advocate will be to continue to remind our governments, our communities, and the larger society that rape culture is a very serious issue and it won't be tolerated. Lastly, I must say that though I was very disappointed in hearing about the issue of the executive order that took place on Friday by Mayor Jack Young, I want to be very clear that the language in the executive order is not what advocates have been working on over the past several months. Unreasonable restrictions on free speech will not be employed, which is presented in the executive order, is not the same language as the city won't require non-disclosure agreements and police misconduct settlements and other settlements involving unlawful discrimination. The language that was included in an executive order is broad, it's general, and it does not hold this administration or the administration after accountable. That is why it was critical for the executive order to include the specific language that we have been advocating for. Only saying that unreasonable restrictions on free speech will not be employed in settlements leaves the order open to interpretation. This executive order reinforces the need for this bill to codify protections very clearly, and I am hopeful that the passage of this bill without any holdouts will correct the incorrections, since it truly does not provide the clear protections that are needed. This is an example of why everyday people don't trust politicians in the 21st century. Let's work together to changing that perception. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions? No? Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thanks.
Victoria Williams.
Good evening. My name is Victoria Williams, and I'm here as an individual resident of Baltimore City. Good. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. I'm here as an individual resident of Baltimore City and as a member of Not Without Black Women. I'm here to speak on behalf of victims, especially victims of sexual assault and abuse, and their rights to tell their stories. As a recent graduate of the University of Baltimore School of Law, and soon to be lawyer, hopefully, it is my personal duty to advocate for the disempowered and pursue justice. In law school, the interest of justice was always a concern in our curriculum. We were taught to analyze both sides and consider possible consequences of legal decisions. This burden is heavy but necessary. NDAs not only silence the victimized party, they also foster a culture of fear and added trauma. Individuals will be further discouraged from trusting the police and the legal system. By allowing a practice of NDAs, we contradict the role of law enforcement and legal professionals in protecting all individuals involved. Silencing victims goes against progress. Silencing victims is not in the interest of justice. I challenge you all to support victims in the way they deserve and let them tell their stories. Thank you.
Thank you. Trey Murphy.
Just wondering how far I had to go. I need to go to the bathroom. All right. Council Chair Slifer, honorable council members, thank you for the opportunity to be here to testify on such an important issue. You've heard a lot of smart people talk about a lot of reasons why this bill is important, so I don't feel the need to echo anything that's already been said. But I do want to raise a few points. And so sorry, my name is Trey Murphy. I'm with the American Civil Liberties Union. Should have started off by saying that first. But I do want to raise a few points. One is that the gag order practice is predatory. And we have to acknowledge that this is a predatory practice that has been happening in a city that is trying to heal from a lot of trauma for years. And to allow such a predatory practice to continue will be a slap in the face of everyday citizens who elected you all to be here and who have put trust in many community-based institutions. The practice is also unconstitutional, as laid out by the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals decision to uphold the Overby case as an example about how free speech violations have been violated, how free speech has been violated by this practice. But the bill does not just address gag order. It also addresses much needed oversight of our city law department. We all know that when it comes to settlements, it's hard to get any actual data from our city's law department. And so this bill also requires that our law departments report what the public has the right to know about. One, how many settlements does the city enter into? Two, how much of taxpayer dollars are going to these settlements? And three, transparency should be just a basic common decency when it comes to taxpayers and Baltimore residents' rights. So in closing, I want to state the obvious, right? Baltimore has an opportunity to be a beacon of hope, which we all want it to be, but it has to start with ending this practice. This practice has to be ended in order for us to shed light on what the truth actually is. And we have to hold our city's law department, we have to hold our city, our police department, our city agencies accountable for the things that they do. And at a particular time when we have a consent decree, nothing is more needed than to restore trust in our public systems. And that starts by ensuring that we end this practice and give people the opportunity to share their truth.
Thank you. All right, the next three up are going to be Brudell Pearson, Adina Britt, and Marcella Holloman Hill. So Brudell Pearson.
City Council members, thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'm Dr. Bridal Pearson. I'm the presiding chair of the Civilian Review Board of Baltimore City. I just have a few quick comments. A number of things have been stated. I'm not going to echo everything that other people have stated. Now, I do appreciate the mayor signing the executive order, but, and I'll say again, but it does not establish law, policy, and I'm concerned that it'll confuse people in the public to think that that's what's happening. So it can be a very confusing thing. So I want people to be clear that the executive order does not do anything that advocates to remove these gag orders and this practice and policy of doing it wanted us to do. It does not. I think that most of us stand firm with the need for this bill, 190409, transparent oversight in claims and litigation. It will establish a clear policy grounded in law. Now, getting to the city solicitor, and I want to be very brief about this, but echoing with Senator Carter had stated, I was the chair when she was the director, and how can I put this? And I want to be respectful, but I think that every behavior and action that I experienced with the solicitor has been antithetical to transparency, accountability. He has worked to undermine the Office of Civil Rights on every observation I had with him. He would not, the fact that we had to go to the extreme action to sue the city just to do what we were sworn to do by the city council is beyond absurd. He found a way to remove Senator Carter, then Director Carter, from the office, basically told the police not to give us cases, breaking the law himself. And so I want to be clear about that because this is the person who is advising our leadership. And I think that's problematic, especially under a consent decree when we're looking for more transparency and accountability. And there's a lot more I could say, but I'm going to stop there. I believe that we should not forget that we're talking about people's lives here. Yes, it's policy, but sometimes we get so caught up in the conversation of policy that we forget that we are discussing the everyday lives of people who may not be privileged and may not have the resources that a lot of us have. So let us not forget that we are talking about people's lives. The board that I chair, we read cases weekly, daily, about police misconduct that is taking place, and it's heart-wrenching. Sometimes I feel sickened by reading these cases. We hear about some of the extreme cases that happen, those are terrible, but things are happening like this every day. And we can't forget about those people, and we should not have policies and practices that worsen the lives of the citizens, especially the most vulnerable, the ones we all should be responsible for protecting. It's shameful, in my opinion. Victims of police misconduct must have the right to speak their truth, to share their narratives. They shouldn't have to carry that, and nor should their families. They also should always have access to any information that impacts their lives and be able to share that with people. And so we need to push this bill forward. We need to push it forward, and I'm going to stop there. Yes, I'm going to stop there. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Adina Britt.
Good evening. First, I would like to say that I'm extremely suspect of an 11th hour executive order put forth by Jack Young, knowing that this hearing was going to take place. And I'm also a little annoyed when people bring up the fiscal part of the settlements that are paid out, because maybe it should be more of an issue that the police are terrorizing citizens. Okay, so on September 10th, 2015, my house had a home invasion done by police officers under the guise of a search and seizure warrant. My son was 12, and multiple officers held him at gunpoint in my basement. My husband was handcuffed face down on my sofa, and I was made to lay face down on my living room floor. My son is still receiving weekly therapy for the anxiety and PTSD that they have caused him. As adults, my husband and I deal with the PTSD in multitude of ways, but mine costed me my job, and my peace of mind, and the sanctity of my home. If Mary Young and Andre Davis want to claim that the causes aren't currently being enforced, then why should they be part of a settlement in the first place? And to me, it just adds a caveat that should any party on the side of BCPD, including the city solicitor, choose to, they can enforce it at will, leaving you in a cloud of uncertainty and paranoia. If you've never been part of one of these cases, you don't know how they're carried out. And you're taken into a settlement discussion with a retired judge who explains in no uncertain terms that you can be pursued further should you discuss any part of the case or the settlement within the agreement. To the degree that, being ours is less than a year old, my son wondered if he was allowed to discuss the situation which causes PTSD and anxiety with his new therapist that I obtained for him a few months back, because he thought that since he signed the NDA that he couldn't talk to her. And as a minor, he had to sign it. They made a minor sign it. I've gone to meetings with activist groups and felt I needed to speak cryptically, that I felt invisibly handcuffed and figuratively gagged by what I could not disclose when trying to vent and relate to other folks in the room. It's almost ironic that I was working under the false phrase that city and BCPD leaders put out, if you see something, say something, because I was reporting drug activity in my neighborhood. Yet I had a home invasion performed on my home by BCPD, and my family terrorized into silence. And I'm going to tell you that a multitude of these cases wind up in civil lawsuits because you cannot get any kind of recourse through internal affairs, through the state's attorney's police integrity unit, or elected officials, because I tried all of those. I tried all of those, and I still have no resolution to my internal affairs case. We never got to the deposition phase in our civil case because my husband and son were too traumatized at being held at gunpoint, my husband being handcuffed, that they didn't want to relive the trauma 3 years later, because that's how long they dragged the case out, 3 years. So the idea of a gag order is in full effect from the moment BCPD engages contact with you because you feel gagged, because when the police are terrorizing you in your own home, who do you call? Do you call the police like Ms. Overbay did and get assaulted for doing so? You can't call the police on the police. And then the state's attorney doesn't help you, even though they have a police integrity unit, which is why the feds wind up taking up some of the hardcore cases. There's the reality of a gag order is placed into effect when a retired judge induces this supposed consent while signing one. I ask Mayor Young, city solicitor, and city council, if you're implying NDAs aren't going to be enforced, why include them in settlements in the first place? People can never actually be free from trauma until they can hash it out loud whenever, wherever, and however they choose, and stop violating the civil rights of citizens and vote to end the use of gag orders now. Thank you.
Thank you. Marcella Holman Hill.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Marcella Holman Hill. I live in the 13th district. I made a 911 call for mental health crisis was turned out to be a rabbit hole. On May 19, 2012, my firstborn child, my one and only son, was shot with 2 bullets in his chest by Paul Mikowski and a bullet in his back by Gregory Gregg within 60 seconds, which is 1 minute from unlocking the back door to my home. I saw my son take his last breath in my living room. And I still live there every day. Since 2013, I have been fighting for the last 6 years for the citizen grand jury to the point that federal courts, federal court appeal judges, and Baltimore City Circuit Court judges done threw their careers under the bus blocking me. There is no reason for you to take a person, child, in their house in their face. And then after you do that, you get no justice. Then you told that you would never be able to mention their name again in life. I've been a victim from the time that they came in my house and killed my child. I've been a victim not to get any justice, and I'm being a victim by blocking me, telling me that I would never be able to mention his name in one life. You know it's wrong, you know it's stupid, and it don't make no sense whatsoever. So to sit back and have something long, drawn out, and going all this is really unnecessary. Just go ahead and do the right thing, because no one did the right thing by me at all. I had called my council person, which is Shana Sneeze, and asked her would she sit with me to hear and see my case. She told me that she's not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer either, but I turned into one to fight my son's case. Because if I get into the citizen grand jury, it will prove that my son, Maurice Donald Johnson, was shot, killed in my house, in my face, in front of me and my daughter. It was premeditated for his organs by Johns Hopkins Hospital, and I have all the proof. And of course, because of what I say, no one cares, but it is not going. Because of this, the murders will continue. The police is the gang. They're the one who dropping off the guns. They're the one who's shooting up the people. They're the one who's doing everything. So to keep sitting here and keep acting like that we just killing each other like a bunch of rabid dogs, it is ridiculous. For the last 6 years, 7 years now since Maurice been dead, no one from every city councilman, from every delegate, from everywhere I had called all over. Nobody's interested to get with me, to sit with me to see what I got, because if I do, it will shut this thing down. Because these boys are dying for no apparent reason before their organs by Johns Hopkins Hospital. It didn't need to stop. There's no reason that these people cannot plan a life, cannot plan the future. They never know when they're going to die. They don't know if the cops going to kill them or if they're going to have somebody kill them off the streets. This is ridiculous. But don't nobody ever want to come nowhere near me. I've been doing this for a while. Shorty know, because he the one turned me on to all this. But it's true, and he see what I have, and nobody else choose to really care. There's no way you're going to have 8 people get shot in the middle of Pennsylvania Avenue and not nan camera pick up not nan person. But as soon as the citizens do something, you got it right there on the camera every day. So if you want to find out what he's killing, look at the camera. When you killed Freddie Gray, my nephew was in a little ride. You came to my house every day looking for him because you looked on the camera. So look on the camera and find out who's killing us. Because we are dying. And we are dying every day. I'm trying to save lives. I shouldn't have to see my son die in my house, in my face. You don't know what that feel like to live that every day, to have it every day, to put it aside and try to walk around normal. It's a very hard thing to do, but they are killing us. And you know why they're killing us? You know it's wrong. It's wrong. There's nothing changed from 1619 to 2019 for black people in America. Thank you.
Thank you. The next 3 up are Greta Carr, Marcus Anderson, and one person, Abby, just put her first name. So if you're Abby, I'll call you up third. So Greta Carr.
Greetings. My name is Reverend Dr. Greta Willis. I am the mother of Kevin L. Cooper, a young man who was 14 years old, who was shot and killed as well in my home by a Baltimore City police officer, Officer Roderick Mitter, on August the 12th of 2006. I have been before this council on numerous occasions and have spoken for various reasons. I stand before you today not only representing my family, but other families as well. In the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. What matters to me is we are now living in a city that is in crisis on a daily basis and in despair, need of repair. We are in a desperate need. By removing the gag order, we will no longer silence the victims, families. It will give families freedom of speech, which the Constitution grants, and propose is to state the facts in their cases regarding the wrongs that has been inflicted upon them by Baltimore City Police. It has been going on in our city for years and years. In my case, my family was offered $10,000 in an arbitration hearing in which we refused. I will not allow my son's name to be swept under the carpet. His name will stay speaking from west side to east side to north side all over Baltimore City and across this nation as what happened to my son in my home unjustly. I will not be silenced. According to the scripture in Luke 8:17, for nothing is secret that shall not be made manifest, neither anything hid that shall not be known and come abroad. Removing the gag order is a step in a positive direction towards righting wrongs that has been done to our families, restoring the trust in this city, because currently there is no trust. There has not been trust in our city between the residents and law enforcement for a very long time. So do what you have in your power to do, which is right. And that is to remove the gag order so the families can speak about what has been done to them so that we all can heal and begin to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Marcus Anderson.
Hello all. I'm speaking on behalf of the Anderson family. Back in 2012, my father was brutally murdered in front of my grandmother and my then 2-year-old niece. They were only preparing for her birthday party, which would take place the next day. Police tried to cover it up and said that they saw him in cahoots with a hand-to-hand transaction, which they never went to investigate anybody else to see if that was actually true. This man had no drugs on him. He had no money on him. All the money that he just had, he just spent at a packaged goods store, getting his girlfriend something to drink. Now, as he walked across Biddle and Milton, police crept behind him, slung him over his head. Due to his injuries, he had a ruptured spleen, 6 broken ribs, blood force trauma to his head. But the police, again, tried to cover it up and said that they saw him with a hand-to-hand transaction and that they only subdued him by pulling him down to the ground. Now, I play professional sports. I play football. I played football for years. If I can't get those type of injuries by just a takedown, what makes you think that he will get those injuries or sustain those injuries by just a proper takedown? They kicked that man to death. It happened in front of my grandmother. You know what they told my grandmother? Back up before this shit happens to you. Those are exact words. My niece didn't know what was going on at the time. She was very frantic. She just see that you putting your hands on her grandfather. Then they say he tried to run. This man was preparing for surgery next week after the birthday party because he had problems with his feet. He was on a cane. There was no possible way that he could run. Further down the line, they called the ambulance. They held him up for 2 hours. Tried to give him a botched report. They tried to get them to coincide with what they were going on. Medical examiner deemed it a homicide off the break. They tried to administer Narcan or whatever the police give to junkies. That didn't work. Then they tried to say, "Oh, he's just faking, so he don't go to jail." I say that to say this. Silencing the victims, it won't solve anything at all. I know you won't silence me. I don't care what they have to say. I'm here. I'm going to continue to let everyone's name ring. You can't silence me. And if you feel as though, oh, you want to get rid of me, it's a million other people behind me that will continue to have my voice ring out. I'm not scared to die. Just to allow my father and also the other victims of police brutality to continue to reign. I'm a man of faith. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod, thy staff, they comfort me. Thou prepares the table before me in the presence of my enemies. That's why I have no fear of anyone, especially not the police. All the corrupt things that they do, they claim they're here to protect and serve, but when it boils down to it, they're only here to protect and serve themselves. They got little simple things, little minor things that they can say to get them out of trouble. Oh, I fear for my life. Oh, he was resisting arrest. They even say that after it's caught on camera, the things that they're doing. But the victims still get swept under the rug. Why? Because they have people in power, like yourselves, that will continue to help them, continue to be corrupt, and continue to sweep the victims under the rug. So until the head gets popped off, it's going to continue. But you're still going to have people that's going to continue to fight day in and day out.
Amen. I just have one thing to say. Hello, my name is Nicole Pettiford. I am the wife of Marcus Pettiford, the daughter-in-law of Anthony Anderson, and I am here to let you all know that because of your corrupt police officers, I will never be able to see this man ever again. When me and my husband have children, we have to tell them stories about their grandfather because they will never meet him. I am here to let you all know that not only do I stand behind my husband, I stand behind everyone in this room that have dealt with and have gone through the pain and the suffering that we have went through. You're not just hurting us. You're hurting our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. When is it going to stop? And the thing about it is, the reason why it's not a problem to you, because it hasn't happened to you yet. Let it have been your son or your daughter or your mother or your father. How would you feel? Nobody is here to help us. When are y'all going to hear our voices? Because like everyone in here say, we're here to stay, and we do matter. Our lives and our family members matter to us just as much as your families and your lives matter to you. And I would say in closing, I would hope that you would take heed to everything that everyone in this room have said to you guys tonight, because you really need a reality check. And I hope and pray to God above, you never have to face the pain and anguish that we all had to face. No matter how angry I am, no matter how hurt I am, I still wish y'all a better life and a better turnout than what we've all had. Thank you.
So on the sheet, it just says Abby. Is there an Abby here that didn't write her last name? Okay.
Sorry about that. Hello, I'd like to thank the committee members for their time and work, and also all the advocates who've been working on this issue for years and speaking tonight.
Can you just state your name for the record?
Yes, my name is Abby Koch, and I'm speaking today as a resident of Baltimore City. I'm here because while I can take this tape off my mouth and say what I need to say, too many people cannot. People who've not only done nothing wrong themselves, but are in fact victims. And as has been mentioned, when you've been victimized, speaking openly about what happened to you is a crucial part of the healing process. You need to get it out, get feedback, and have the peace of mind to know that you've done everything you can to make sure that it doesn't happen to someone else. And that last point is an incredibly crucial one for me, because as much as this is about justice, fairness, and humane treatment for victims, it's also about every single one of us, as people have been saying. When law enforcement officers and other officials are able to victimize people without any public accounting of what happened, we're all kept in the dark. We don't know who was involved, and we don't know how to keep ourselves safe. In the last year, I've been doing a lot of reading and speaking to people about the Baltimore Police Department, and I've become more and more deeply disturbed as time has gone on. And one fact that has stuck out like the world's biggest red flag to me is that it was a county police officer who tipped off the FBI to the activities of the Gun Trace Task Force. The city's Internal Affairs Division had been receiving complaints for years. The city's State's Attorney's Office had been receiving complaints for years. Lots of people here in Baltimore City had every reason to know what was going on, and in fact, could hardly have avoided it. And yet it took someone on the outside with no personal investment, no reason to fear for their own safety, to raise the alarm and to get the criminal activities in BPD, some of them at least, shut down. In an atmosphere like this, anyone who's paying attention can see that we can't trust the people who are supposed to serve and protect us, which is a terrifying state of affairs. And of course, gag orders only further the mistrust and fear of city police because the message is loud and clear: we have something to hide. We can't solve the violence problem in Baltimore without solving the police violence problem. And ultimately, this bill is one piece of that puzzle, so I thank you for working on it. And what I think we need to see is local control of BPD handed over at the state level, so we're no longer in this extremely unusual position of not directly controlling our own police department. And then the entire force needs to be disbanded and rebuilt from the ground up. As they did successfully in Camden, New Jersey, which resulted in reductions in both police violence and community violence when nothing else had. And finally, I want to speak to the case of Keith Davis Jr. This is an unarmed man who was shot multiple times by BPD officers who then tried to let him die through negligence, and when he didn't die, BPD and the state's attorney blatantly framed him for murder. And he's facing 50 years in jail for a crime that, if you look at it at all, he very clearly did not commit. If you don't know his story, I beg you to look it up. This is gonna sound cheesy, but I've written about it myself with many citations at 1-baltimore.org, entry number 7. But my point in bringing him up is when he is exonerated and freed, I don't want to see him be forced to choose between supporting himself and his family and telling the story of his long ordeal, which all of us need to hear. Freedom for Keith Davis Jr. and freedom for all of Baltimore. Thank you.
Thank you. The next three up would be Dwayne Davis, Claire Landers, and Bill Belich. Dwayne Davis.
My name's Shorty. Mike check! All right, so we understand this. Councilman Cone, Councilman Yitzy, Councilman Burnett, Councilman Sneed, Councilman Pinkett, all right? We had this discussion about corruption and racism in your courts and corruption and racism in your Democratic Party. Directly addressing this issue right here. On February the 2nd, my mama died from cancer. February 2nd, 2011. On February the 2nd at 8:30 a.m., I came to the city solicitor, the state's attorney, Baltimore mayor, and and Chief of Police Belfield to turn in the corruption and racism in the Democratic Party. On February the 7th, 2011, the same material that I turned in to the city solicitor and the state's attorney, I was charged with terrorism in Baltimore County and locked up for 58 days illegally. They kidnapped me. My mother died and I couldn't go to her funeral. You understand what I'm saying? For 58 days, I sat in jail. 58 days later, I was homeless. I came out of jail with some flip-flops, some sweatpants, and a t-shirt. Not a nickel in my pocket. You understand what I'm saying? I turned in the corruption and the racism. On October the 15th, Columbus Day, after Governor O'Malley and Ehrlich had their debate at WJZ, Baltimore City Police came in my house, the state troopers came in my house because I was blowing the whistle on O'Malley and the O'Malley machine. Some of y'all part of O'Malley's machine. Some of y'all still getting some of O'Malley's money to keep this gag order thing going. You understand what I'm saying? Because Governor O'Malley's old people that he's old heads got to be replaced by y'all new faces. You understand what I'm saying? Now anything that I say to you, right here. You can have it. Give it back to me in 7 days. Now this right here, I'm gonna break down your criminal enterprise. I'm gonna show you the role that your media play, and I got a witness right here named Fern Shin. She testified at my trial. She testified on my trial because I put that toilet in front of the school board to expose your corruption in your school board and the money you was jacking off over there. I'm a caterer. I've been in your houses since 1997. I know where you spend your money and I know what you do. So this is for everybody to see because this ain't about me, this is about us. I'm not showing this to you and you can have a copy of it. All right? This breaks down your politicians. All right? This breaks down your politicians. All right? Your judges, your lawyers, your state's attorneys. And this is yours too. Because you need this a blueprint to end your corruption. You can have it. It's on court record. Anything I say, the ACLU got it. Anything I say, the NAACP got it. Anything I say, your county council got it. Show the people the truth. If you don't want to do the gag order, give us access to the grand jury. Give us access to the grand jury. Give Tawanda Jones access to the grand jury. Give the families that have been victims of the police access to the grand jury. The way do you take us to the grand jury? Fair exchange ain't no stick up without a gun. I want to stick you up and watch you run. I'm coming after your money. I'm going to sue you for millions and billions and billions of dollars because we want to file class action lawsuits like Thurgood Marshall did. You feel me? Because if you, that's the only thing that y'all respect is money. Only thing that gets your attention is your money. That's why you got this gag order in order, so we don't take your money. You feel me? We don't sign that gag order. That means that Tawanda, that means that Anthony Anderson, that means that Marcella Holloman can sue you for like $180 million. $180 million, that means that you ain't gonna give the police that $500 million because you got to pay me first. You feel me? Money the only thing that you respect. Money the only thing I'm coming for. Mic check that.
Thank you. Claire Landers.
Hello, my name is Claire Landers, and I serve as co-chair of the Leadership Council for Jews United for Justice. We organize the Jewish community in support of issue campaigns that move us all closer to racial and economic justice locally in Baltimore and statewide. In police accountability efforts, JUFJ is a partner organization with the Campaign for Justice, Safety, and Jobs Coalition. JUFJ strongly supports the City Council in passing 190409, the Transparency and Oversight in Claims and Litigation Bill. As we have educated people within our community about the need for this bill, the response has been utter disbelief that silencing victims of police misconduct is a standard practice in the city's settlement process. They recognize it as eminently unfair and wrong to gag victims of police abuse from publicly sharing their own lived experiences. Banning the use of gag orders in police misconduct settlements would also serve a greater public interest by lifting just a bit the heavy veil of secrecy that systematically shrouds BPD's problematic officers from scrutiny and public accountability. Let me underscore one stunning example. In 2006, after just 2 years on the Baltimore police force, a certain officer was the subject of the first of 4 lawsuits for police misconduct. By 2009, 3 of those victims received a jury verdict or settlements for abuse by this one officer. Yet his clear pattern of bad behavior stayed under the radar, invisible to other city officials and its taxpayers. However, this officer's career not only survived, but thrived. In fact, to the public, he was hailed as a hero by high command. That officer's career came to an abrupt end only last year when a federal judge sentenced Sergeant Wayne Jenkins to 25 years in prison for crimes he committed as the leader of the infamous GTTF squad. If way back in 2006 or 7 or 8, those first victims had not been legally gagged from speaking about what a young Officer Jenkins had done to them, perhaps there would have been a response to the red flags waving for all to see. Public transparency could have prevented additional victims of police misconduct in the 13 years after. Could have saved the city significant taxpayer funds, could have ensured this problematic officer early in his career was retrained or dismissed. And then Baltimore would have been spared Jenkins' outlaw policing, exactly the kind that has shredded community trust and brought such shame to the Baltimore Police Department. When victims of police misconduct are guaranteed their right of free speech to speak their truth, the citizens of Baltimore will all benefit from a small measure of the public transparency and accountability over their police department that has historically been denied them, but that they well deserve. JUFJ urges the members of this committee and the full City Council to clearly and with finality end the use of non-disclosure agreements imposed on individuals entering into settlements as a result of suffering police misconduct, as well as sexual harassment and other lawful discrimination, with this common sense and long overdue legislation. Thank you.
Bill Bleich.
My name is Bill Bleich. I've been a teacher for the Baltimore City Public Schools for 45 years. I had the honor of teaching 3 of the cousins of Tyrone West, 3 wonderful young people. I'm a member of the weekly West Wednesday rallies, and I'm a member of the Revolutionary Communist Progressive Labor Party. There's an important history to our fight against the gag orders. Recently, a report came out entitled "Lynching in America: Confronting the Legacy of Racial Terror." It covers 1877 to 1950 and says there were 4,384 lynchings over those 74 years, an average of 59 terror lynchings a year. For example, in Memphis, Tennessee, white police officers fired into a group of African American men, women, and children. Afterward, racist white mobs rampaged through black neighborhoods. During 3 days of violence, 46 African American people were killed, and 91 houses, 4 churches, and 12 schools were burned to the ground. And many black people fled the city permanently. The black population in the United States at that time, over that span of years for which the lynchings were measured, averaged 10 million people. Today, the black population in the United States is 4 times larger. If we want to put the number of lynchings in a modern context, 4 times 59 would mean the equivalent of 236 lynchings per year today. As horrible as that is, the number of police killings today is far worse. Far worse, about 1,100 per year, an average of more than 3 police killings a day. This government-sponsored terrorism is intended to scare people into submission. The capitalist ruling class is scared of rebellions, and they desperately use police violence to try instilling fear. On the top of the police killings, there is also a huge amount of police brutality that does not lead to death. By the best estimates available, there are an average of 88,000 cases each year of excessive police force that do not lead to death. That's 240 cases each and every day. In Baltimore alone, there have been hundreds and hundreds of cases of police murder and excessive force in just the most recent decade. When much of humanity wanted to abolish slavery, we had to talk about it all the time, building strong determination to destroy that institution. And then when we had to do the same to try putting an end to lynchings, today we have to focus attention again and again on police brutality. The gag orders are an effort to impede that necessary work. Anyone who truly wants to stop police brutality has to take a strong stand against gagging the victims. We need their voices, all their voices.
Erica Hamlet, Ralph Johnson, and Melissa Wasser.
Good evening. For almost 900 plus days now, I have attended meetings, attended hearings, followed up, and became a lawyer to seek justice for my son. November 2016, my 16-year-old son was in his neighborhood waiting to be picked up by a van when a male dressed in a hoodie and blue jeans approached him and asked him what he was doing in his own community. He seemed out of place. This was in Howard County, 3:45 in the afternoon. School buses dropping off children, people in the cul-de-sac getting out of their cars, coming home from work. Yet my son was approached by an off-duty, plainclothes Baltimore City police officer when he did not like the answers that my son was giving to him, which was a complete stranger. He pulled his gun on my son. My son was doing exactly as I instructed. Wait for your van to be picked up. It's the intuition that kicked up inside of me to say call to make sure he was doing what he was supposed to be doing. And the moment that I was calling my son, he was calling his grandmother, screaming, saying, somebody is in the cutway and they have a gun pulled on me. I run outside, no coat, no shoes, to my son. My son is coming towards me and I can see the figure behind him, still following him. At this time, I walk past my son to approach the perpetrator, because that's who he is to me at this time. And I ask him, why did you pull a gun on my son? He has his hands in his pocket. He's talking erratically. I don't know what's going on. He says, I'll explain to you in 1 minute. He says he's on the phone. I don't know. We're trying to figure out what's going on. I keep telling him take his hands out of his pocket because my son said he had a gun. Again, he is unidentified and plain clothes. He never identified himself as a Baltimore City police officer until Howard County Police showed up. When they approached the scene, they asked, who has the gun? We pointed to the officer. He said, take your hands out your pocket. He takes his hands out of his pocket. There's a weapon in one pocket and a holster in the other. He had pulled his weapon, pointed it at my son, and lied and said that it was in a low ready position and still hosted at the time. I have video of the entire incident. I have filed an internal affairs report. I have had a hearing by the CRB. I've heard many people in this room talk about my son's story. I was one of the people that had to file a lawsuit against the city solicitor that instructed the Baltimore City Police to withhold the files for the CRB hearings. So the case was finished in June. I never got a hearing until November. I hear people talk about money and these gag orders. Please understand that gag orders start long before you sign the NDA, because it's all a systematic setup of how they treat you all the way to the table. They keep telling me, I don't understand. Why you keep going at it? Because when we went to the police station to file a report, they laughed at us and said, oh, we heard about that. At least he didn't die. My 16-year-old big black son, and I say that because that was a point that he continued to make in court when I filed a peace order against him, because my son had to walk past his home every day to get to and from school. We lived in Howard County for 6 years. He lived in Howard County for 6 months and told my son he looked out of place. My son told him, you look out of place. I don't know you. You're a stranger. He initiated the interaction against my son, and when he did not like my son's response, he pulled a weapon on him. He could have easily murdered my son for no reason. For over 600 days, almost 900 days come November, I will have fought at every level to have this officer held accountable. Officer Damon Durant. Officer Damon Durant had already broken the jaw of another man, and the city paid out $70,000. By the time he did this to my son, when we ask people to be silent, this is what happens. Police officers take it to the next level, and the next level, and the next level. First is beatings, then it's murder. The city solicitor has blood on his hands. I've asked several times, how is this not a conflict of interest that this man gets to control every aspect of the legal department? You will never understand the victimization of this process, because you will never have to go through it on this level. If anything happens to either one of your family members, it will be rectified in months, in seconds, in minutes. You won't ask to be quiet about what happened to you. You won't go into a courtroom to defend your son and there's a lawyer present. That retainer fees are paid by the millions to get these officers off. I was the only one present in the appeal court hearing for the 12 police officers who had their cases dropped because they let the time run out. I looked at documents of legal proceedings that were not signed and dated. How does that happen? This has been done 1,000 times. How many millions of dollars has been spent on lawsuits? So you're not going to tell me that you don't know doing a departmental when you're being charged with whatever you're being charged with, because all was recommended was 5 days of suspension for pulling a gun on a 16-year-old kid. So how do you sit at the table and reprimand somebody, but they get up and walk away like it never happened? You don't even have to sign paperwork. That makes absolutely no sense to me. So the gag order, it follows you. When you first make a complaint, they're already setting you up to teach you to shut up. How do you heal from things that you don't get to talk about? The month of November now for me means that one of my sons was diagnosed with leukemia. I lost my set of twins 19 years ago. And then 3 years ago, my 16-year-old son at the time had a gun pulled on him and could have been murdered. You will never understand being a victim at this level. Never. because you will never have to walk in our shoes.
Being black in Baltimore.
Ralph Johnson.
First of all, I'd like to thank God Almighty for allowing me the opportunity to be here. My name is Ralph E. Johnson, Jr., and I am running for mayor of the great city of Baltimore. And I'm here to say that I totally disagree with the gag order. I think it's a disrespect to the quality of life. It's essentially a hush money, and more than anything, Baltimore is in need of transparency. So I know you are a group of fine legislators, and I know you're going to do the right thing. God bless you all. Thank you.
All right, so we have some more people to testify. If you don't mind, give me a second. One of our colleagues has to head out. And so we're going to vote on this bill prior, if you don't mind. Anybody want to move the bill?
I make a motion to move the bill.
Second.
Amendments, favorable. Ready for roll call?
Mm-hmm.
Chairman Schleifer.
Yes.
Chair Schleifer votes aye. Vice Chair Burnett.
Yes.
Vice Chair Burnett votes aye. Mr. Cohen.
Yes.
Cohen votes aye. Councilwoman McCray.
Yes.
Councilwoman McCray votes aye. Mr. Pinkett.
Yes.
Mr. King votes aye. Member Sneed.
Yes.
Member Sneed votes aye. Mr. Chair, there's 6 votes in the affirmative, no negatives. We can go to second read on Monday if that's the desire of the committee.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah!
One more minute, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Councilman Pinkett?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. While I would imagine that all of my colleagues appreciate the applause, you shouldn't applaud us for doing what's right. So thank you, but we shouldn't get applause for doing what we've been charged to do.
Thank you. Melissa Wasser? Thank you for your patience.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. My name is Melissa Wasser, and I'm here representing the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. I am a policy analyst based out of Washington, D.C. I want to thank the Public Safety Committee, all of these advocates today for sharing their stories and for doing what's right. Thank you for the opportunity to submit testimony in support of this bill. A little bit on the Reporters Committee. We were founded by leading journalists and media lawyers in 1970 when the nation's news media faced an unprecedented wave of government subpoenas forcing reporters to name their confidential sources. Today, our attorneys provide pro bono legal representation, amicus support, and other legal and policy resources to protect the First Amendment freedoms and the news gathering rights of journalists. We filed a friend of the court brief in the Overby case that found a non-disparagement clause in a police misconduct settlement to be void because of the strong public interest rooted in the First Amendment. And for those reasons, we'd like to make 3 brief points in support of this bill. First, as mentioned by the other advocates, transparency is essential in police settlements. One of the interests at the heart of the First Amendment is a profound commitment to the principle that debate on public issues should be uninhibited, robust, and wide open. These claims of police misconduct, as well as the circumstances in which the city litigates and settles such claims, are exceptionally newsworthy public issues that should be freely discussed. And the clauses that are before these gag orders directly hamper that discussion. Second, we must be able to preserve the press's ability to report accurately and fairly on allegations of police misconduct. Reporters routinely rely on parties to these incidents as sources. These clauses directly impair the ability of reporters to gather information from the individuals most affected by these cases. Third, the gag orders here are one-sided and they skew news coverage. The clause in the Overby case was particularly harmful to the idea of news gathering because it bound the claimant, Ms. Underwood, but not the city. These one-sided clauses are particularly pernicious in that they permit the city and the police department to frame the narrative and only give one side of the story. The Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press believes that by passing this bill, you will significantly improve transparency and accountability on an issue of paramount public interest, police misconduct. And regarding today's earlier executive order, it may be a step in the right direction, but as you just did, the best course of action is to codify this language by passing this bill. Thank you so much.
All right, the last three is Samantha Blau, Lydell Hills, and Nicole Henson.
Thank you, Chairman Schleifer, and members of the Public Safety Committee. My name is Samantha Blau. I'm a homeowner in the Patterson Place neighborhood in the 1st District, and I work on the Inner Harbor in the 11th District. I would like to thank you guys for passing the Transparency and Oversight in Claims litigation bill. Hopefully it continues on. I value my First Amendment rights, and I'm especially grateful to have those rights as I share my story this evening. I was harassed, verbally attacked, and physically intimidated by the Baltimore City Police while at work 2 years ago. I returned back to my place of work after a long evening running a cultural event for families at a local school, and I was helping my staff to unload our vans on our employer's private lot. 2 officers in a squad car came careening the wrong direction up our private driveway, and when they could not pass because our vans were blocking the lane, they exited their squad car and proceeded to berate and intimidate me. I don't feel like I really need to go into the details about the tactics used by men in positions of authority to intimidate women, to describe how officers in this country hide behind uniforms, badges, and guns when bullying civilians. And I don't think that I need to talk about the Baltimore Police Department's problems because I think that our federal Department of Justice wrote a really good report describing in detail that the BPD routinely violates civil rights. Everyone in this room already knows that there is a problem, so I don't need to relive that trauma. I don't, I'm a white woman. My story pales in comparison to those of my fellow city residents of color. My point that I'd like to make is that I should be able to stand here in a government building, share my story just as I am now, without any repercussions. And I should definitely be allowed to share the incident with my employees, as I did, in order to implement a safety protocol that we now use, which states that no one is allowed to unload our work vans at night alone because the BPD might show up. And if you're alone, there's no witness. That's a problem. If the incident had escalated, if I had chosen to file a case against the city and settled in an agreement that included a gag order, I wouldn't have been able to share any of that with my employees or any of my neighbors because it would have been considered disparagement against the city, and that's ridiculous. We know as a city that there's a problem. We know that as a city, we need to own up to it and face it head on. And that means that we need to be able to discuss this freely and openly. So I would like to end by sharing a teaching from a Jewish text called Pirkei Avot, or The Ethics of Our Ancestors. And this is a really well-known teaching. It says, it's not up to you guys or us to fix all of the problems, but that doesn't mean that you can give up on them either. If you study the meaning of the law, you will be rewarded, and that reward will be in the form of a righteous future. Thank you.
Lydell Hills.
Honorable members of City Council, thank y'all for providing the opportunity for me to be here today to speak on this important issue. My name is Lydell Hills, and I'm a member of Black Leaders Organizing for Change. I'm also here as a young black man in Baltimore City, in a city where being a young black man can be a crime. And so I'm also here to ask for a favorable vote on this bill, and I thank y'all for those proceedings. The harsh truth is that in the city of Baltimore, we're at a crossroads, and we can either repeat the same failed mistakes of the past or be a beacon of hope for what Baltimore can become. And the gag orders to stop victims and survivors of police brutality from being able to speak on their truths and share what happened to them is an impediment to creating change in our city. If City Council and the mayor are serious about ensuring all the rights of Baltimore residents, particularly black citizens, and making sure that they're protected, they will support this bill and end the gag orders. And in closing, as a poet, I'd like to discuss the word disparage and acknowledge the importance of words and the use of language. So disparage, to disregard or represent as being of little worth. I believe that the actions of the police officers of Baltimore City have done this on their own. And the context is that we understand the word disparage under is to besmudge an organization or some group's reputation. And what I believe is that we must be able to hold the police in our city accountable if there's going to be any kind of relationship between our civil servants and us, and y'all as civil servants as well. And so, in closing, I want to ask just this one question: what is a civil servant if they silence the people that they serve? An overlord, a tyrant, that making us peasants and slaves within a feudal system. And so, the accountability for unconstitutional measures by the gag orders that were countered by the consent decree, along with the consent decree and other accountability measures, we must remove that gag order to repair the relationships in Baltimore City and allow survivors of police brutality and sexual assault to heal and to speak their truth to power. Thank you.
I'd like to, if we can give 1 minute, Nicole. I just want to turn the floor. One more? Okay. Is that after? Nicole, please come up. Sorry.
What about the short people? Good evening. For the record, my name is Nicole Hansen. I am the executive director of Out for Justice, a nonprofit organization that advocates for individuals who are formerly incarcerated and individuals who are currently incarcerated. And our job is to pay close attention to the legislative process. So I won't echo what many of the advocates has already said. What I will say is that our city solicitor, Mr. Davis, stated in an article that he was obligated and responsible to the city, to the law department, and his predecessor. And we would ask him, what city are you responsible for? What city are you upholding the law for? Because it's not Baltimore City residents. He stated that it's about institutional integrity. At what point has he operated in integrity? We still have individuals that have open cases who the city is supposed to be paying out currently, and he is blocking these individuals from getting their payment. You still haven't paid these claimants, and so I'm trying to figure out how is he standing in integrity. He also states that, and what's unfortunate about this executive order that our mayor signed, while it's great intention, we cannot leave it up to Mr. Andre Davis to decide what is reasonable and what is not reasonable. We cannot leave it up to Mr. Davis to decide what is reasonable and what is unreasonable. Lastly, I'm just going to say it. This man has been emotionally unstable. and professionally unorganized. And it makes me feel like that the reason why he continuously blocks things that are just constitutional, it's just the law. He continuously blocks them because I really feel like he's in over his head professionally. He has been able to prance around this city as a judge and go to great events, and just be this guy. And he has not had to manage a whole department. He didn't have to do that as a sitting judge. And now he does. He has to manage several people, several departments, make a lot of different decisions that he's just not prepared to do. Word around town is that his office is very unorganized and he has paperwork piled up sky high. And so his only out is just to say no to everything so he does not have to address the mountains of paperwork that he has in his office. And so my question to you all, because many of you are, want to become mayor and want to become president, we ask that if this is your aspirations, that you do not allow him to serve out any terms with you all. Because if you cannot go on record to say that you will not continue your term with a man like Andre Davis, then we don't want you in office, because you won't be standing in integrity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, we have nobody else signed in for testimony. I'd like to turn over the floor to the council president for closing remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here. First and foremost, let me thank the committee for moving this most important piece of legislation. I think that this is about lasting change in Baltimore. I often say when we're considering legislation that we're not just talking about today. We have to leave things that last longer than terms, that last longer than any mayor, any council person, any council president. And that's what we're trying to do with this legislation. Baltimore is a city that itself said that we had problems with the police department and invited the federal government in, and we're now under consent decree as a result of that. And we cannot, on one hand, say that we have deep issues with our police department and then silence citizens of Baltimore who've been victimized by the very reasons why we have a consent decree in the first place. So I want to thank the committee for moving this bill, because what we are trying to do here again is to make sure that this never happens again. No matter who's the mayor, no matter who's the council president, no matter who's sitting in this chamber as a council member, this practice should have never happened and should never happen again in the future. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Councilwoman Snead. Thank you to the entire committee. But, Mr. Chair, I do have 3 questions from Mr. Petro before we leave, and I'm sorry if any of you have asked these, but Mr. Petro, since you're representing the law department, the first one is, do you oppose any of the reporting requirements that are listed in the bill?
We did not reach the reporting requirements in our bill report because we felt that it was violated the charter.
Okay, thank you. Well, we will send notice asking you guys to give us an opinion on that, Mr. Blendy, if you can make sure that we get that. Also, if you could explain for the ordinary person the difference in the language in the old NDAs versus the new NDAs that currently exist. What's the difference between how we used to do non-disclosures versus how they're being done today?
I'm not in a position to be able to answer that question tonight.
Mr. Blendy, we would like to receive an answer for that as well. And then the last question, which I think is actually the most important, can you still limit what plaintiffs can say through NDAs, NDA clauses, and settlement agreements under the executive order?
I believe the executive order says that reasonable limitations would be appropriate.
So that would be a yes? That depending on what they wanted to say, it could be limited, correct?
That's what it appears that the executive order says.
Thank you. Because I think that when we're talking about trying to end it, period, it shouldn't be ended based on what someone else's opinion is. If someone has been victimized, they should be able to tell their stories, especially when their own taxpayer dollars are being paid out to them because they were brutalized by people that are supposedly public servants. So, Mr. Chair, thank you, and I look forward to an ongoing discussion with the administration and the council as we move this piece of legislation forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I think. Yes. Just come to the mic and state your question. We'll give you an opportunity. When's the next council meeting?
I just asked if you can explain the process for this bill after today.
Sure. So the committee has already moved the bill, so it's going to go on second reader on this coming Monday at the council meeting. That's the final vote? No, so that's second reader, and then it'll go on third reader. What's the date on the next one? I don't have the calendar in front of me, but go ahead, Mr. President.
Sir, so what will happen is once it comes up to second reader at the chairman's behest, all that information we put out in the public, you know, my office actually sends out the agendas and the hearing schedule, so you can get all that information from BaltimoreCityCouncil.com and simply click legislation. But easier for you in this particular case, we'll be pushing it out via social media so that you can see that information.
We just don't have the calendar in front of us as to what Mondays the upcoming council meetings will be. But the next one is going to be this Monday, but the council president will circulate that and we'll all publish that as well. So thank you all for attending this hearing. Please check the area around your seat to make certain that you have everything that you brought with you. We'll be closing the room shortly and ask that everyone exit promptly to the first floor main entrance. Again, thank you for attending this hearing.